At what point you guys decided on the tone of the series? Because it's obviously a little darker than what we've seen from Marvel, while still feeling very much in that world.
It was something that was discussed really at the very beginning, not just about Daredevil, but also about all the Netflix shows that we were going to be doing. And it really wasn't a question of whether or not we were going to do it. It was that Daredevil warrants that kind of storytelling. And, you know, as you know better than anybody, you know, Marvel starts with story and what is appropriate for that character, what is appropriate for the kind of story that we're going to tell on Netflix in 13 hours. That then, beginning in that place, when we first started talking to Drew and then ultimately with Steven, it was important that we all saw it the same way. And the nice part about it is I don't think, and Steven can speak to this as much as I can, there really wasn't any other decision to be made. It was what was appropriate for, if we're going to tell a story about the rise of a hero and the rise of a criminal empire. We always set out, you know, I've said this before, to do a crime drama first and a superhero story second.
Well put. When I came on, it was already set in that gritty, grounded world. And, you know, I threw a little bit more dirt on there. But also, we never wanted to take it all the way to R. We all agreed that Daredevil wasn't the property. It didn't warrant going all the way to R-rated. I think it's PG-15. I think it's technically.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, it's TVMA.
Yeah.
You know, we've never hid that from the very beginning. We've talked about it, you know, always, that this was going to be something that would be different from what we're doing. But we also look at it from a very practical place, which is, you know, I think that if I said to any of you, you know, 2 years ago, we're going to make a movie and two of the main characters are going to be a 3-foot gun-toting raccoon and a talking tree, that you might look at us and go, really? From Marvel? How's that going to work? And so this is just simply the same thing. It's how to find the best way to tell the best story. And in this particular case, it was on Netflix in 13 hours that had a real feeling to it, because at the end of the day, Daredevil takes place in Hell's Kitchen, and we wanted to make sure that it felt very much like New York City, and that it was a different kind of New York City than we saw in the world of Tony Stark and the world of the Avengers. You know, just starting out from the very beginning, we always saw that the Avengers were here to save the universe, and that the street level heroes, as we like to call them, are here to save the neighborhood. And in order to make that work, you had to see the neighborhood, believe in the neighborhood, get to know what was going on. And the kinds of movies that we were referencing at the very beginning when we started talking about this, and then Steven came in and, you know, and agreed with that same vision, which were, you know, in the early 70s when filmmakers were doing, you know, different things. So films like Taxi Driver and French Connection and Serpico, those were the films that really influenced where we were, because they also were the films that were influencing Frank Miller and Brian Michael Bendis. So that it all sort of filtered together in order to come up with where we landed.
So in order to maintain that balance between sort of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like the Save the Universe stuff, versus, you know, like these more grounded stories, how was it to sort of root it in reality and, you know, like pick from the storylines in Daredevil to, like, you know, make sense for that to be what happens as an outcome from the aftermath of the bigger things?
It goes to character. And why we didn't pick any specific storyline from any of the runs on Daredevil, we were spiritually influenced. Me especially, largely by Frank Miller and Brian Michael Bendis' run with Alex Maleev. And with Alex Maleev's art, we were also very much influenced by, we look at that and we said, that's the look of the show. I mean, that really captures it. So, and again, for us, it all came down to character. With 13 hours, what we have is the luxury of time. If we were doing a movie, you'd see Wilson Fisk in the first 10 minutes, and we'd set him up. But because we have 13 hours to play with, you don't see him until the end of episode 3. And again, even if we were on a network, you would see a lot more of Wilson Fisk in that first episode. But because we're with Netflix, you know, they really support long-form storytelling, where we can let the story breathe, which is what I really loved working on this, is we never felt we had to burn through a bunch of story. We never felt like we had to have 3 action set pieces per episode to keep the audience interested. We just really allowed it to breathe and live the way it wanted to live.
And by the same token, you know, one of my favorite things is that, you know, there's, when you first get to meet Wilson, and we had always talked about the idea that if we were going to create this, on the one hand, monster, we needed to be able to make sure that we saw another side of it, that there was a 3-dimensionality to it, in the same kind of way that Charlie Cox's performance as Matt Murdock is so, you know, it's compelling and damaged and vulnerable and funny and does all of those things. We needed to make sure that his antagonist was as strong, and so, you know, that entire episode is built around a love story, and then this horrific thing happens that suddenly shakes you out of, oh, we're in that, and so that's, you know, part of the joy of being able to know that, you know, you don't have to wait another week in order to see what's going to happen after that. You can actually just, you know, hit a button and there you go. You're going to get to find out what's going to happen next.
What are the other appreciable differences between working for a network and Netflix? Because the networks, they have, you know, 50 years of history of how to create TV shows. These guys are kind of doing it all from the ground up the last few years.
I don't know that it is so much about network versus Netflix as much as it is what story are you going to tell. We wouldn't have done a show like S.H.I.E.L.D. on Netflix. It was something that was created as something that spun out of the Avengers, that we had at its heart and core Phil Coulson, Clark Gray playing a role. You know, Joss Whedon and Jed Whedon and Marissa Tancherona and Jeff Bell, when they first sat down and started talking about the show, it had a certain tone and elegance to it that we loved and felt very much of that world. When we first sat down and talked with Drew and with Steven about Daredevil, you know, we agreed that was the way to tell that story. Are there things that you can do on Netflix in terms of you know, a level of violence or a certain piece of language or anything like that? Yes, but we never leaned into that in order to lean into it. There's no point in ever doing that. It's what's best for the story, and that's what's the fun of Marvel Television is that we're able to tell different kinds of stories on different kinds of venues and let people see the richness of the Marvel Universe. You know, I say it all the time, I cannot think of 2 more different films to come out in the same year than Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy. And that those, for the motion picture division, which is separate from Marvel Television, you know, really set up and said, we can do a high-octane political drama that has people firing real bullets into, you know, civilian areas. Oh, and then also we have a 3-foot gun-toting raccoon that's running around in the distant outer space. We wanted to be able to say the same thing out there in the television division, which is, you know, we can have, you know, Haley Atwell as Agent Carter in 1946 trying to figure out how she's going to be able to prove that she's better than anybody else in her SSR office, and at the same time Matthew Murdock is trying to clean up Hell's Kitchen, and it all lives in the same world.
Now, because of the fact that they all live in the same world, obviously you've got Civil War coming. That's going to be something that's going to be expansive. Even though the tone and you're trying to keep the Netflix series a little bit solo, I mean, obviously there are going to be those drops to the universe, like the incident, as you know, you keep referring to it in the first couple episodes. Will we see Civil War affect Daredevil at all, or any of the Netflix series?
I don't want to get too specific yet. I mean, all we can say is that things that happen are things that are acknowledged, if that makes a sense to it, and we'll see as we go. I mean, we also don't know, you know, when certain things are going to actually land, and so you've got to be very careful as to how to tie your continuity together and where it goes. What we did want to establish very early on was that what had happened in the Avengers had a very distinct effect on what happened to Hell's Kitchen. But not in a way that if you hadn't seen the Avengers that you would do it. And I remember very early on, there was actually a reference to the sky opening up and aliens coming pouring out, and we realized it sort of took you out of where you were. You were like suddenly going, wait, there's aliens in this world? And so that's when it sort of became more the incident, or that, you know, in the same kind of way, you know, in a very real world kind of way, that people refer to 9/11 as 9/11. Like, they don't talk about, you know, it was the day that the towers fell, or any of the other specifics of it. There's a shorthand that came along that everybody understands how horrible that experience was in a very unique and personal way. So we wanted to be able to do that in a way that could say, okay, this happens here in case you're playing the home game, but at the same time, it's not terribly important that you know, because obviously people were going to ask us right away, do I have to see, you know, the Avengers in order to understand what goes on in Daredevil? You know, our hope is that you see it all, because we're Marvel, but at the same time, you should be able to enjoy each of these stories separately and individually.
That's something that really drew me to this project, is not only that it is part of the Marvel Universe, but it's its own little dark corner of the Marvel Universe, but also the fact, just reading the first 2 episodes that Drew Goddard had written, is that I was immediately struck by the fact you could be a hardcore comic book fan and be drawn into the show, or you could know nothing about Daredevil whatsoever, and it does not matter. You could have not seen any of the Marvel properties, the comics, the movies. I don't know how that's possible in this day and age, but you could come to it completely fresh, and it's all right there.
Jeph, I just wanted to ask you, to the point you were just talking about the continuity, with the Defenders series that will take the 4 characters from these other series, put them together. I was curious about the choice of the title of the Defenders as opposed to Heroes for Hire, which is also from the comics, which would maybe make more sense with the street level. Was there a reason why the Defenders was chosen as the title as opposed to Heroes for Hire or something else?
When we get there, I think it'll become apparent.
It'll be clear,
yes,
so that will be
absolutely
clear. Okay.
Assuming the audience likes it as much as we do, is there a door open for future seasons of Daredevil beyond this first 13 episodes?
That's really up to Netflix at the end of the day, but I think that the short answer is that we all had a really good time, and we have an extraordinary cast, exceptional writers, and the production team and directors that are remarkable. And so it would be our hope to be able to tell more stories, but you guys know me well enough to know that I have the same questions about every one of the shows that we do. It's very different than the movie business, where depending upon how the movie does at the box office determines whether or not there's going to be another movie that comes after that. But that's really Marvel's decision to make. In this particular case, these are decisions that are made by the networks themselves.
And the good news is there's plenty of material.
That's for sure.
I'd say, and the other great thing about the Netflix model is, you know, we didn't have to burn through 12 antagonists. You know, we didn't have to bring in Bullseye and Elektra and the whole Rogues gallery. That you can spend time with just one character, one antagonist, is fantastic.
Is the Punisher maybe the next character that you may think about making a TV show?
You know, there's what's great. I mean, as Stephen just pointed out, is that this tier of characters, of the street level heroes, which includes the Punisher, it's a very rich group of characters. We never want to be driven by who the other character may be, as we always want to start from a very simple place, which is what's the best story for Matt Murdock, what's the best story for Jessica Jones, Danny Rand, Luke Cage. If we can find a way to then include something that would get people incredibly excited, that's fantastic, but we would never do that just to do that.
Unless it's Stiltman. Me and Dan Buckley are obsessed with getting Stiltman in there somehow. I'm not quite sure how that'll work, but we'll figure it out.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.